So welcome to our DRAC, which is Disaster Resilience Analytics Center seminar series. Today we have Deniz in Karakoc. She is currently a doctoral student in civil and environmental engineering at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and she earned her MS degree in industrials and systems engineering from the University of Oklahoma and her bachelor's in industrial engineering from Bilkent University in Turkey. So Deniz will present her work on community resilience. So with that, Deniz, I'll let you start your talk.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, first, I would like to thank everyone for inviting me. And today I will present to you my research I conducted in my master's, which is Community Resilience Perspective on Interdependent Infrastructure Network Restoration Planning and Component Importance Analysis. So you can see the outline of my talk. I will give the motivation behind our studies, and I will introduce two separate methods, one for the optimization model, the second one for the component importance analysis. We implemented both of these methodology on the same example. I will briefly go over it, and then I will talk more deeply about the results we obtained and finalize with the concluding remarks. So as we all know, societies heavily rely on critical infrastructure networks and their proper functioning, like electric power, gas, water, transportation, communication networks. We use them on our day-to-day operations, and we rely on them for our well-being and quality of life. However, these critical infrastructures are highly vulnerable because they have this interdependent nature where in functionality or a disruption in one of them can cause cascading effects throughout the system and disrupt the performance of another network. And they're especially for recently getting more and more prone to natural disasters. And due to old aging, they are vulnerable against system-based failures. And with the new technological incorporations, focus on the cyber aspect of the infrastructure network, they are becoming targeted by malevolent attacks as well. Therefore, any disruption that could happen in these infrastructure networks would also impact the community, and societal daily lives will also be disrupted. Additional to the inherent vulnerabilities of the infrastructure networks, also the geographical and social vulnerability of the surrounding environment impacts how the networks perform. If you think about an infrastructure network that is located in a region that is geographically vulnerable against earthquakes or hurricanes, their performance will be disrupted more frequently. And how the served society is able to adapt against this disruption will also impact the overall performance of these networks. In this study, we focused on integrating the social vulnerability of the served community and how it impacts the overall system performance. Social vulnerability is defined as the set of characteristics of a group or individual in terms of their capacity to anticipate, cope with, resist, and recover from the impact of a hazard. So in case a disruption happened, there is no electricity, there is no water, certain demographics or characteristics within the society can be able to cope with it easier. They can be able to survive faster, but certain groups could be suffering more. The disruptions will be more damaging for them. In the literature, there are many ways that we can quantify the social vulnerability. Some studies focus on the availability of the recovery sources, like how many evacuation routes exist, how many work crews for the restoration or evacuation are there available? What are the number of hospitals we have on hand? What are the number of shelters we have? Some other studies focus on the past disaster experience. As human beings, we live and we learn. If we have been faced with disruptions beforehand, for the next time, we will be more prepared. Probably we will have a plan. We will be able to anticipate, okay, probably it will take a couple of weeks to get the electricity back. What should I do? I should stock water. I should start canned food. So with the experiences, I'll be more prepared, more ready when the next disaster hits. So it will impact me less. For example, in New Orleans, people are used to hurricanes hitting their businesses. So certain businesses cover their glass windows with wooden pieces so that the glass would not be broken down and shredded all over the building inside. So once the stuff is getting cleared out, there won't be any more health hazard additional, right? And more commonly, literature focus on the certain socioeconomic characteristics within the society and which of them make people more vulnerable or less vulnerable. So in this study, we focus on quantifying social vulnerability based on socioeconomic characteristics because it is a more commonly studied, heavily studied version of quantifying social vulnerability. Additional to integrating social vulnerability to the restoration scheduling of infrastructure networks, we also integrated to the critical component analysis. Critical components are the ones that have the largest impact on the performance of the network that they are located in, as well as the other interdependent infrastructures. In the literature, it has been studied before heavily how to identify the critical components of the infrastructure networks. And there exist multiple measures to rank the critical components. Some studies focus on topology-driven measures, like the higher the degree of the node, probably it is more critical. Some other studies focus on flow-driven measures, like a node that provides majority of the flow suppliers could be more important for the network. And there are some other studies which focus on resilience-driven measures. So increasing the resilience of a component and how much it affects the overall resilience of the system. Since we are focusing on the resilience of infrastructure networks and community resilience, we thought it will be consistent if we also adapt a resilience-driven measure to identify the critical components. So for our first methodology, we modify a resilience-driven multi-objective optimization model for the restoration scheduling of interdependent infrastructure networks, such that it will maximize the overall resilience of the system, and it will minimize the total cost associated with the restoration process. The restoration process cost could be hiring the work crews, sending them to the disrupted components. They are working on the disrupted components to repair them. And finally, the model will prioritize the disrupted components in the restoration schedule based on the social vulnerability level of the served area. So we integrated social vulnerability in both cost and resilience objectives. We chose our demand nodes as the representation of social vulnerability because the supply node will represent what the network provides for the community, but the demand node will probably represent what the community needs from the infrastructure network. So any social vulnerability related parameters are assigned to the demand nodes in the infrastructure network. We calculate both the average social vulnerability score of the demand node service area and the population density of the service area. So whether this demand node is representing a larger amount of people or a smaller amount of people is also effective in our decision making. So we use a time-dependent measure of resilience. The overall idea we have for resilience is after a disruption, the flow will be somewhat damaged. So the network performance will not be as high as its original case. So there will be some unmet demand introduced to the network. Certain demand nodes will not be receiving all the flow they need. But once the restoration process starts, components will be repaired, so the flow will start to carry on and demand nodes will meet the total flow they need. So we formulate resilience as the amount recovered over the amount lost due to a disruption. Once all the amount that has been lost in the system performance due to a disruption is completely recovered, the network will be back to its original performance, so a complete resilience will be achieved. This is how we formalize our resilience maximization. I'm not going to go too much into detail, but if you have any questions, I can definitely explain it further in the Q&A section. And for the cost objective, we assigned an unmet demand penalty cost for each demand node. If the community is not being met with their needs, then there must be some type of a punishment on the overall network, which will represent the damages made on the network. That's why we assigned the unmet demand penalty cost, and we weighted it with social vulnerability and the population density of the service area. So if flow is not being delivered to higher number of people who are inherently more vulnerable against disruptions, the overall punishment on the network will be higher. And some other restoration-related costs are restoring the disrupted nodes and disrupted links. These are work crews actively working on the disrupted components to make them operating again. So at the end, this is what our multi-objective optimization model look like. We have a resilience maximization for the overall system through time, and we have a total cost minimization for the restoration of infrastructure networks through time. Our constraints are pretty common in general, I think. And since we have a multi-objective optimization model, we employ epsilon constraint method to solve it. What we do is we convert the resilience maximization objective into an epsilon constraint. We set this equation equal to 1, which represents all the additional unmet demand introduced to the system due to a disruption is now fully recovered. System is back at its original performance, complete resilience is achieved. So we set this equation to 1 and we solve the model with a single objective of cost minimization. For the second proposed model, we again have a resilience-driven multi-objective optimization formulation for the restoration scheduling of interdependent infrastructure network, but this time we prioritize the disrupted components in the restoration schedule based on social equity, and we study them per social vulnerability criteria. In this approach, we integrate both vertical and horizontal equity to the system. Vertical equity ensures that all the components are fully restored. So all the service areas will achieve complete service. No one will be left behind. And the horizontal equity is forcing our model to start the restoration from the component that has been more heavily disrupted. If we were looking at equity from just network performance point of view, what we would do is we will look at the original amount of flow at each component and how much it decreased once a disruption hits. So the larger the difference, the more important the components become, and we will schedule it prior in the restoration process. But since we are integrating social equity, now we are multiplying this difference with the social vulnerability and population density of the society. So if a component actually didn't lose a lot of flow, but it was critical, serving a higher number of people who are inherently more vulnerable, then the weight will bring the total impact of the disruption higher for that component, and it will be restored prior. Similar to our resilience function, we use a time-dependent measure of social equity. Again, we looked at the difference between amount of unmet demand introduced to the system because a disruption happened and how much of it is restored at each time period. And we try to find the maximum of that difference from the original case versus the after disruption case, and we weighted it by social vulnerability and population density. So once we solve our model, we finally get a restoration schedule with each time slot assigned to the recovery of a different disrupted components. And based on the result we obtained, we use optimal recovery time as our component important measure. The component that has become fully functioning, restored beforehand, will be considered as more important for social equity. And this is what our second model looks like. Additional to the total cost minimization and resilience maximization, now we have a social equity objective. And again, this is a multi-objective optimization model. So to solve it, we use epsilon constraint. Similar to the first case, we set the total system resilience equal to 1, which also ensures the vertical equity. All the unmet demand must be met, all the components must be restored, all the service areas should be fully meeting their needs. And we converted cost minimization into a budget constraint. So we solve our model only by using social equity objective under a certain budget and resilience constraint. And finally, since we are looking at each social vulnerability criteria separately in our second methodology, we get different ranking of components under each criteria. But a decision maker might be interested in having a final aggregated list, which also takes into account the individual effect of each social vulnerability criteria. To obtain a final aggregated ranking of the components, we use TOPSIS, a multi-criteria decision analysis technique. And TOPSIS weights each criteria and then gives us a final ranking of the components based on their closeness to the most important component and their distance from the least important component. So we implement both of our optimization model and the component importance analysis on the interdependent infrastructure networks in Shelby County, Tennessee. Shelby County, Tennessee is a very commonly studied benchmark example for infrastructure network resilience because it is actually located in a geographically vulnerable area. It is on the New Madrid seismic zone, so it's prone to earthquakes. And the infrastructure networks for power, water, and gas distribution has physical interdependencies between them. The power generated is used in the water network to pump the water, and the water generated in the water network is used in the power network to cool down the generators. So there is a physical interdependence between them. And in previous literature, there has been a simulation study that provided potential disruption scenarios for Shelby County under multiple earthquake magnitudes. The simulation study gives us what are the components that are most probably be disrupted in case of an earthquake with magnitude 7. What are the components that will be additionally disrupted if the earthquake magnitude is 8? How long will it take to recover them? What are the flow amounts on the components? A simulation study gave us this data. So it helps us to kind of practically show what our model does at the end of the decision-making process. And additionally, we were able to get open access data for block group level socioeconomic demographics within the Shelby County. So we have the Shelby County. We go one step below, the county is divided into districts, and we go one more step down. Now the county is divided into block groups. So it's a very finer spatial scale data on quantifying social vulnerability. So this is where the Shelby County is located within the state of Tennessee and within the United States. Actually, the city of Memphis is located in the Shelby County. And to quantify the social vulnerability of the served society, we adopt Soviet-Light algorithm. It is a more data efficient and easier to interpret for practical explanation version of the original Soviet algorithm. But the Soviet-Light algorithm still has the capability to consider more than 250 socioeconomic characteristics if the data is available, which groups them into 11 factors and a total of 42 social vulnerability variables. Some of these 11 factors could be race, ethnicity, age, health condition, educational level, economic level of a person. So including more factors, a total of 42 vulnerability variables in a complete set of data in case we can still run a complete Soviet-Light algorithm with that data. So for the Shelby County, based on the data availability, we were able to collect information regarding these 8 social vulnerability variables. Each one of these variables represent a portion of the population that is more vulnerable against a disruption. They will be suffering more because they're probably living on more underdeveloped areas. They will need assistance. They will not be able to cope with it on their own. They do not have spare economic funds to recover faster from it, take precautions from, or English is their not native language. So they might not be fully aware of current updates in terms of where did the disruption hit? What is the worst neighborhood that has been affected the most? How long will it take to recover from it? What are the available resources? So they might not be able to fully be aware of those. And finally, to determine what is the service area of each demand node, we use Voronoi diagram method. The Voronoi diagram method defines the boundaries for each Voronoi cell such that all the points within the Voronoi cell is closest to the predetermined point. And the background is how the block groups are distributed within Shelby County. And now, based on this Voronoi diagram set boundaries, we are able to quantify what based on geographic closeness, what we assume is the service area of each demand node. And we finally look at the correlation between social vulnerability variables, and we realize that certain demographics are highly correlated, and therefore they might be in more immense danger in case a disruption hits the area they're living in. So it will be way harder for them to recover from it in a timely manner without being severely damaged. So for our computational results on the restoration scheduling optimization with social vulnerability focus, we use the power, water, and gas networks in the Shelby County, and figure D represents the interdependent system. How do they look like? And this is what the block group level social vulnerability scores look like. So we aggregated all social vulnerability variable data, and the darker the shade represents socially more vulnerable population is more heavily located in that block group. And we took the average of the block groups that have been served by each demand node and assigned that average as the demand node social vulnerability score. As you can see here, we also assigned the population density of the covered block group per demand node. So we run our restoration scheduling model with and without considering social vulnerability. These results are for an earthquake with a magnitude 7, and this is how the timeline of the restoration of each disrupted component changes once we consider social vulnerability and do not consider it for the water, power, and gas networks. We see some components become less important because they're not serving socially very vulnerable communities, but other components becoming prioritized during the restoration schedule. We also observe a similar case for earthquake with magnitude 8, but since earthquake with a magnitude 8 is a more devastating disruption, more components are being disrupted in that case. So we see higher number of components changing their importance in the restoration scheduling once we include social vulnerability additional to the system performance. And this is what the overall system performance trajectory looks like through the restoration process. This is for the earthquake with magnitude 7. We looked at without social vulnerability, with social vulnerability, and in figure C, we plotted them on a single plot together. We realized that the amount of unmet demand each time period T is different once we include social vulnerability, even though at the end of the restoration process, they're all becoming 0. So all the additionally introduced unmet demand is completely recovered at the end of the restoration process. But for each time period, we observe differences based on which component is restored first. We have a similar result for earthquake with magnitude 8. And in generally, what we're seeing is unmet demand for each time period T is actually decreasing faster once we do not consider social vulnerability. So the trajectory of decrease is slower once we consider social vulnerability. And the main reason is that once we incorporate social vulnerability, the model chooses the component that serves to a more vulnerable region rather than how much flow it will contribute to the whole system. We can think about an example. Let's say we have 2 separate families and they're both losing their access to electricity. And now they do not have any heat, any stove, oven, fridge working at home. The first family is highly educated. Their economic level, we can say maybe upper middle income class. So they have spare funds for the bad days. They have a car. They're working on high skilled jobs because they have higher educational levels. So in case a disruption hits and they lose their access to electricity, this family just can pack up their bags, hop on their car, drive to a distant location, and get a temporary accommodation in a hotel. They will be able to actually pay for it, right? So their daily lives will be disrupted, of course, but only a certain degree. They will still be able to have their basic needs like a shelter, food, transportation. And since they're working on high skilled jobs, they might be able to maybe work remotely, or they might be able to skip a couple of days from the work because they're economically stable. And let's assume their English is their first language, so and since they're highly educated and economically doing well, they have access to all news outlet media, so they're getting aware of the updates all the time. They know probably how long it will take for the restoration to be completed. They know where are the resources for the communities set up. So they have a plan. Probably for a couple of weeks, they will stay in a hotel, try to manage work remotely and as much as possible, and they have their fundings that will cover them during this period. So even though it will not be same as their everyday life, they will still be comfortable and doing well. On the other hand, let's think about there's a second family, and this family is economically not that stable, and their education level is not that high. So they are not working in high skilled jobs, and they don't have the spare funds or the car. So in case they lose access to electricity, like losing your heat in a winter time, it will impact them more drastically because they won't just be able to pick up their stuff, hop on their car and get a hotel. They will not be able to afford it. And therefore, they might have to stay in the condition that they're currently in for a longer period of time. And let's assume one of the family member is differently able. So additional accommodations and precaution must be taken to make sure that they are healthy and safe and comfortable during these times. And maybe they're not native speakers, so they are not that aware of what is going on currently. They're not aware of the updates as better as the first family. So they don't know how long this condition will last. They don't know if there are any places that they can get food, water, or heat. So this family, even though in both families, cut off electricity is the same condition, based on inherent vulnerabilities, it will impact those families differently. So once we run our model without social vulnerability, our model treats these two families equally. Components that have been disrupted, that were transferring electricity to these two families, were considered same in the restoration scheduling. But once we include social vulnerability, any component that was serving the second family will be prioritized in order to make sure they will survive and they will get into better conditions faster, because the more we delay their recovery, the impacts will be more detrimental in their case. So at the end of the study, we realized that once we consider social vulnerability, the optimum restoration scheduling from the network performance point of view actually not optimal for what is the society is going through. Because the impacts of the disruptions are not same for everyone within the society. And for the second results, in our component importance analysis study, we only looked at the power and water networks and the interdependent system of them. And these are the 5 social vulnerability criteria we considered. We removed some of the criteria from the first study because they were highly correlated. So the ranking of the components will be not significantly different. So we ranked which components are most critical for each social vulnerability criteria separately. And we calculate block group level social vulnerability per criteria. So we only consider the population group that fits into this certain criteria. As you can see, social vulnerability changes if you consider only a certain demographic. And this result can give a decision maker the flexibility to maybe, if they have a preference, they think a certain demographic might be more vulnerable, it will give them the flexibility to emphasize it more. For example, a city planner might be more focused on improving the conditions of a household living under the poverty line. So maybe this social vulnerability calculation and determination of which components are the most important for a household living under the poverty line could be more important for the decision maker, and they can plan their future investments based on that criteria. So for the water network, we consider an earthquake with a magnitude of 7, and we studied 50 different disruption scenarios and averaged those ranking of the components based on those 50 disruption scenarios in order to get what is the general behavior of the network. We didn't want to study only one disruption scenario so that the component importance will be impacted by some extreme cases. We ran 50 different scenarios under the earthquake magnitude 7, and we aggregated them, and we observed that for each social vulnerability criteria, the top 5 components are the same. So these 5 components are always ranked at top 5 for all different social vulnerability criteria. But later on the list, we observe more variation. For example, node 32, apparently in its service area, people over the age of 65 is more heavily the residents. So in case a decision maker is thinking about, we need to prioritizing our investments on the infrastructure network components that are serving households living under the poverty line, then node 33 will not be on the top of their list. And a similar result we obtained for the power network. Again, we consider an earthquake a magnitude of 7, and we studied 50 disruption scenarios and averaged them. And in power network, we observed higher variation among which component is critical under different social vulnerability criteria. Only the node 27 is always the component that has been scheduled first in the restoration process, and its functionality is enforced earliest. But then we observe variations among the components. The main reason we see more variation in the power network than water network is a power network has a larger size. So there are more components with varying flow amounts and restoration rates. That's why, since in each of the disruption scenarios, the number of and the type of components that are being disrupted is changing heavily. That's why we have more variation in the aggregated form. And finally, we wanted to give it one final list of most critical components, which includes the individual effect of each social vulnerability criteria. To do so, we use TOPSIS, and TOPSIS requires for the decision maker to assign weights to each criteria. And in order to determine those weights, we use a principal component analysis method to calculate these weights. And now the ranking of components under each criteria is weighted by the PCA determined scores. And based on the weighted TOPSIS methodology, this is the final list of critical components. We just looked at top 10, but there are more than maybe 50 components disrupted, but we wanted to look at top 10. And this is what the top 10 most critical components are for water and power network that are aggregated based on different social vulnerability criteria. In power network, we see all of them are nodes. In water network, they're also generally nodes are more critical than links. This is something we were actually expecting, because the way we account for social vulnerability, social equity is based on unmet demand on the nodes. And also it takes longer to recover the nodes based on the data we obtain. So we were expecting more critical nodes that will be restored earlier to be nodes of the system. And in water network, we can see that the top 5 is the same. That was top 5 for all criteria separately. But in power, it was just first node was common for all the criteria, and its aggregated version of the ranking, it is also the top component. So for the concluding remarks, here we study the interdependencies between physical infrastructure network and the community that they serve. We integrated social vulnerability to the restoration scheduling of these infrastructure networks after a disruption. And we observed that once the social vulnerability is included, components that serve socially more vulnerable areas are prioritized, and the results we obtain, optimal results we obtain with and without social vulnerability are not the same. So from an engineering perspective, maximizing system performance for each time period might not actually be optimal for the community because the impacts of the disruption is not equal for everyone in the community. We also determine what are the most critical components in these infrastructure networks based on social equity, which gives decision makers the flexibility to, if they have a preference on emphasizing more on on certain social vulnerability characteristics, they can plan their investments and future preparedness studies accordingly. And at the end, actually, all of these methodologies with the data availability could be implemented on other cyber, physical, and social systems. And it could be interesting to see what other systems behave like once we consider social vulnerability and social equity during the resilience performance enhancement analysis. Yeah, thank you. This is all I have for today.
Thank you, Deniz. That's an interesting talk. So I'll let others ask questions. So if you have questions, feel free to go ahead and ask. You can also add it in the chat and I can read it out. So while we are waiting, let me ask a question.
Okay.
So you have this particular county for the case study, which is the Shelby County in Tennessee. Now, I was wondering, when you develop your network, does it capture some of the interactions with any of the neighboring counties? For example, there might be resources that the county could borrow from the neighboring counties, or sometimes what happens is the county actually asks the state for support, and there might be support coming from the state during any of the emergencies. So how are those factors taken into account in such a network?
Right. So far, we considered Shelby County as an individual system and not any interactions between nearby counties or states are included here. But definitely that will be interesting to further analyze. One thing that we incorporate could be maybe we can increase the number of restoration crews if additional help is asked for from nearby counties or the state. Maybe the available restoration resources would increase in that case. So we can incorporate it into our model from that point of view. But so far, we did not consider that. But definitely, it could be interesting to study that.
Thank you. There is a question, Megan sent it over chat. So have you shared these findings with local decision makers? And if so, what have been their reactions?
Well, thank you for asking that I personally did not, but I think my advisors have shared those because I believe the data we have also been in collaboration with the state officials in the Shelby County, like the network topology. I think they kind of provided it for us. So I personally not aware of what has been their reaction, but I know that they have been contacted. Um, but yeah, I personally don't know how they took it or whether they actually used it. Unfortunately, I'm not aware of it.
Thank you, Deniz. There is another question from Mara. Is this already published work?
Yes, both of these are published. I can share the link, or you can find it on my Google Scholar. We published both of these studies.
Thank you. There is another question from one of our DRAC faculties. Thanks for the great and interesting presentation. I am curious, in your study, how do you define and measure social equity? Why do you particularly select Shelby County as your case?
Let me go a little back. So the reason we chose Shelby County was, first, it was located in a geographically earthquake-prone region. So any earthquake disruptions we study, we thought, well, there is a probability that that could actually happen in real life. So we are not doing this study just for the scientific community, but there could be practical implications of what we're doing. And we were focused on interdependent infrastructure networks, and Shelby County had that physical interdependency between its power and water networks, but mainly it was based on data availability. If we had any other counties' interdependent infrastructure network data for what could be different disruption scenarios, as more severe disruptions are implemented, more components are getting disrupted, and which are those components, how much flow they carry, how long it takes to recover them. If we have data for any other county, we will be able to implement our study on that as well. But in generally, just to sum up, it was well fitted to our study, and we had available data for the Shelby County. And for how to measure social equity, okay. So what we did is, first we looked at the difference of a performance in each component. What was the original flow they were receiving versus what had it become after disruption happened. So how much flow or how much performance each component lost. And then equity, if we were thinking just equity from engineering perspective, higher the difference, more important the component will be. So we would be restoring that component first. But we integrated social equity as by weighting this difference in the performance with the social vulnerability and population density of the served area. So let's say electric is completely shut down in two separate regions when it's serving a higher number of people with socially more vulnerable characteristics. Our social equity model, based on this multiplication and trying to minimize the accumulated sum through time, it will first restore that component. So more vulnerable population with higher number of people in it will receive full network performance earlier. This is how we formulated social equity, prioritizing more disrupted components that are serving socially more vulnerable people during the restoration scheduling.
Thank you, Deniz. There is another question from one of our WSU faculty, Ethan. Are you familiar with the well-known social vulnerability index from the CDC, and why did you choose to use the cutter-based SOVI instead?
Thank you for this question. We actually, I actually know the CDC, vulnerability, social vulnerability index from CDC, and it was for a different conference presentation. We actually looked at how the results change if we consider different social vulnerability methodologies. And overall, what we realized that pretty much our results are same, because the basic mentality behind every social vulnerability measure is pretty similar. There are certain groups in the population that might be more vulnerable against the disruption. And generally, people identified as more vulnerable is common. It's just the statistical computations are a little different. So we previously tried how it will look, whether it will create such significant difference, and we realized it actually does not. But the reason we chose SOVI is, as far as I'm aware, Susan Cutter she's like the queen of social vulnerability. That was the most heavily studied social vulnerability concept within the literature. More studies were incorporating it. It was a very well-known approach. So we thought if we want these results to reach out to a broader audience, we probably should choose a best known, the most well-known social vulnerability methodology. And that's why we chose SOVI. We didn't choose original SOVI. We just used a more simplified version of calculating SOVI, which is SOVI Lite. It has the same principles, but just the steps, I think, are easier to interpret from the practical point of view. We're looking at the statistical distribution of the population group. So SOVI Lite was a little bit easier to explain to non-engineering audiences, maybe like state officials, that could be. But yeah, we chose because Susan Cutter was who we know as the person for social vulnerability.
Thank you. Okay. I'll ask another question.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at social vulnerability or the output of any critical infrastructure, they are both continuous, they are functions of time.
Okay.
And if you look at them as variables that are changing in time, probably their variations are on different time scales. So my question is, if some stakeholders of Shelby County, Tennessee is going to use any of these optimization problems that you have developed in order to understand how the community resilience is changing over time, how frequently do they need to solve these problems?
Yeah, this is a great question, and it's something we kind of struggled with, because here so far what we did was we just consider one time period, like we didn't even specify whether it's days, hours, or weeks, and we just focused on one time period a disruption happened, and we used while we were conducting the study, the available data for social demographics was, I think, 2010 census. So we were not able to capture any dynamic nature of certain population shifts, people upgrading their quality of life, or being hit with certain unfortunate events and kind of going down in the vulnerable scale. We were not able to capture this so far. But I think it is definitely, it needs to be really frequently updated, in my opinion, not just how this problem is solved, but also the social vulnerability characteristics, the recording for it. We only get census like every 10 years, I think. So it can cause a huge difference, actually. And we might be able to, as you said, lose information within that 10 years. And yeah, I think if you have the data, maybe it should be run, I don't know, every year. But yeah, maybe it's the day-to-day. In reality, it's actually like a day-to-day process, how people's life changes. So yeah, that's definitely a great question.
Thank you. There is another question from one of our WSU faculty. Thank you so much for your answers. My second question is, how did you group those 42 social vulnerability variables into 8 groups? Would you please explain why you focus on the population under 5 instead of under 18 and the Hispanic group instead of other minority group?
Of course. So I think it was somewhere here. Okay, so first, I apologize if there was any confusion about that. This is how the SOVI and Soviet Light was constructed. We personally did not determine the factors. We didn't locate which variable goes into which category. It was already determined by Susan Cutter. We just followed that path. And the population under 5, population over 65, all of those were preset by the previous SOVI study. And we tried to gather information on as much variable as possible based on the data we have. So our data was only on the 8 criteria I presented. But if there were more data, we would love to collect all 42, focus on all vulnerable characteristics, get a more comprehensive understanding. But there was some data limitations on there. And we just followed the method presented to us in terms of what are more critical groups in the society, how do you group them, which factor do they belong to, was adopted from the original SOVI methodology.
Thank you, Deniz. There is probably a minute before 1, so if any of you have questions, one final quick question, feel free to ask. Okay, I don't think there are any more questions, so on behalf of the group, I want to thank Deniz for her time and efforts to present her work to us. I think this is very interesting topic and overall a good presentation. So we really appreciate your efforts over here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation. It was my pleasure.
Yeah. Okay. So I wish you good luck for your future endeavors.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You too.
And thank you all for attending as well. Okay, bye.